Hello and welcome. If you haven't already, I invite you to please click subscribe. There's no obligation, and it allows you to be notified of all new chapters. Additional information about the story, including the author, chapter warnings, and rating, can be found in the description below. All credit goes to the original author. All That Remains by Orphan Account, Chapter 31, For His Sake. Third Age, 2523, 488 years ago. Thranduil had just gotten out of a council meeting when he found Luaneth waiting for him outside of the room. His wife smiled at him, silver blue eyes sparkling with amusement, and the Elven King felt a great sense of foreboding. "Who did Fael prank this time?" he asked immediately. The only time the Queen of Mirkwood looked so amused was when their second youngest managed to make a fool out of someone, like one of the advisors, or a senior warrior, or anyone whose reputation would quickly be tarnished by the mischievous prince's actions, which left Thranduil to soothe bruised egos, redirect righteous anger, and to give Fael a lecture while his mother quietly smiled at their son, her actions negating anything Thranduil said in Fael's mind. Luaneth laughed at the concerned expression on the Elven King's face. "You know that Fael is on patrol right now. Unless he laid out a trap for a poor soul to fall into, then there will be no affronted elves for you to stop from hunting our son." The golden-haired elf relaxed slightly, though he remained wary. "Still, you have that look on your face, my love. What has amused you so greatly? And is it going to be at my expense?" The silver-haired elf's lips twitched upward. "Legolas has something very important to ask you, dear. He's in the gardens. Come along." A gentle arm wrapped around Thranduil's, guiding him through the halls. The Elven King did not resist his wife, though his mind went over 1,000 possibilities of what his youngest child could want. Most things he could think of would not cause Luaneth such mirth. Thranduil's thoughts trailed away as he spotted his youngest, sitting in the middle of the garden with something in his arms. Even from a distance, the Elven King could see fur. The reason for his wife's merriment became glaringly obvious, and Thranduil suppressed a groan. Not again, he thought helplessly. Ever since his youngest elfling had been born, the golden-haired elf had prayed that Legolas would avoid this stage. Every other elfling went through it, Thranduil among them when he was small, but he had hoped with all his heart that Legolas would miraculously go through childhood without going through what Luaneth called the dreaded "can I keep it" stage. Due to elves' closeness to nature, animals were calm in the firstborn's presences. In fact, most were not startled or frightened by the immortals at all. Elves were naturally gifted with presences that would calm and attract the creatures of the forest, wood elves in particular. More than once, Thranduil had seen one of his stern warriors walk up to a doe and gently pat it before walking away. It was an unspoken rule and policy of Mirkwood that if an elf was not hunting or on a long-term mission, they would leave animals alone. The gift to be so close and in tune with the creatures of the wood was wonderful, beautiful, and the most apparent in elven children. Due to their youth and innocence, the auras of elflings were like bait to benign forest creatures. Elven children able to approach even the wounded animals without risk of fear or harm from the creature. Sometimes, animals would even seek out the calming, joyful presences they did not quite sense. In other words, animals like deer, foxes, rabbits, hedgehogs, skunks, birds, and even the occasional turtle, from who knows where, would wander into the palace grounds seeking the elflings. It was all bemusing and taken in stride by the grown elves, who found both mirth and joy in seeing the elflings' awe at the woodland creatures. The animal would be content to follow the elfling for a day, bringing great joy to the young one. But then, the inevitable question would come. "Can I keep it?" Every single elfling had at least one animal come to him or her, and every single one wanted to keep it as a pet. A few animals had already found Legolas in his short life, but Thranduil, the warriors, and the staff had managed to get the creatures away from the youngest prince before the inevitable question was asked. However, this time, it seemed like their careful vigilance had failed. For the 7th time in his long life, and the first time in over 2,000 years, Thranduil was going to have to face the question once more. No wonder Luaneth was looking amused. Legolas spotted his father and waved excitedly. His silver-blue eyes were wide with joy and wonder, a smile on his face. "Arda, come see! Look at what Baraneth gave me!" So, the creature had not come to him for once, making a mental note to demand why Baraneth had decided to give the youngest prince the animal. They already had enough trouble keeping the forest creatures out of the house for valor's sake. The Elven King knelt beside his son, looking at the tiny ball of fur in the elfling's arms. The little lump twitched, a head perking up, and innocent black eyes peered up at the golden-haired elf curiously. The creature was a little rabbit with light brown fur, no more than a baby. The rabbit's ears quivered, ramrods straight, before flopping down on the sides of its head. In his elfling's arms, it was the image of adorableness, and Thranduil struggled to keep a smile from appearing on his face. He had to be strong. He had not let any of his other children keep their new friends, and he could not cave in. The rabbit grew disinterested in the new elf, turning back to Legolas and poking him with its nose. The pale, blonde-haired elfling laughed and hugged the tiny animal. "It's a baby rabbit, Arda." Legolas snuggled the bunny, smiling in content. "Feel his fur. He's so soft." Wide, silver-blue eyes looked hopefully at Thranduil, and he sighed, giving in. The Elven King reached out, gently stroking the light brown fur. The little rabbit was indeed soft, the fur soft and fluffy beneath his fingers. The rabbit calmly let the golden-haired elf pet him, eyes half closed in contentment. "Yes, he is, Little Leaf," Thranduil murmured, not looking at his elfling. He had to be strong. He had to be firm. He could not let Legolas... The Elven King looked up and found innocent, pleading silver-blue eyes staring at him. "Can I keep him, Arda?" the young prince asked hopefully. And there it was. The Elven King could not stand to look at those wide eyes, and instead looked to his wife. He froze, horror filling him, as another pair of silver-blue eyes looked at him with a near-identical expression. A smile played with Luaneth's lips, and she nodded at her husband, still keeping that innocent, pleading look on her face. Thranduil groaned, knowing when he was beaten. Besides, if his queen was assisting Legolas in his attempt, she too must want the elfling to keep the rabbit. "All right, you may keep him," the Elven King told his son, "but you will have to take care of him. He is a living creature and your responsibility. You must wash him, feed him, play with him, and love him. Can you do that?" Legolas's expression brightened, joy overtaking his features. "I promise, Arda. I know I can. Thank you." The silver-blue-eyed prince leapt to his feet, obviously intending to dash off and show his new pet to every elf he met. Thranduil stopped his youngest from running away by gently grabbing the back of his tunic. "Hold on, Little Leaf. What do you intend to name your rabbit?" Legolas blinked at him, startled by his forgetfulness. "I already picked out a name, Arda. I just didn't tell you, 'cause Baraneth said you might not let me keep him, but I knew you would, so I named him, and now I can tell you, 'cause now he's mine," the elfling rambled. The silver-blue-eyed prince smiled, holding up the rabbit. "His name is Floppy." Third Age, 2011. The present. It turns out that I had a pet rabbit named Floppy. Thranduil froze. The words echoed in the Elven King's head, repeating themselves over and over. Floppy. Esgal had a pet rabbit named Floppy when he was an elfling. But he could not be. The Elven King stared at the assassin, eyes raking the young elf's face. The hair was right. The nose was right. The mouth was right. The eyes were wrong. But Esgal had said that he had violet eyes as long as he could remember. And he could not remember anything from before his mental shield. His mental shield, which suppressed his glow and changed his eye color. The violet eyes that were staring at him in confusion was the result of the suppressed inner light. The black eyes he had seen earlier only appeared when the assassin cut off his emotions. But there was another color, a color that Esgal could not remember. The tree, this oak tree, it had happily greeted the assassin, calling him Legolas. It had missed him, it had known him, but how could it know him? It had been in Dol Guldur ever since Legolas came. It had known Esgal, Legolas, because the elf had grown up here. He had grown up here, in Dol Guldur. He had grown up in darkness, trained by an assassin, but the assassin had helped him remain good in a place seeping with evil. The bits and pieces Thranduil knew about Esgal's past were coming together, new information appearing before him with such clarity he could not believe he had not seen it before. 400 years ago, the Witch King had left Dol Guldur for one day. 400 years ago, a mysterious warrior, simply known as the Hidden Guardian, among other names, had appeared within Mirkwood and the other realms. 400 years ago, the Witch King had claimed Legolas was dead, but he was not dead. He had been alive. And the reason the Witch King had lied was because he knew that Thranduil would be crushed by his youngest death, but he had no body to show the Elven King, because the young elf he had kept alive had escaped. The coincidences that had been drifting at the edges of Thranduil's mind swarmed him, blazing and bright as they showed that they were not coincidences at all. Pale blonde hair, raised in a dark place, hated orcs and particularly Nazgul with a passion, had an unexplainable connection with each of the royals, did not remember his past, was younger than any had guessed, kept secrets upon secrets to protect himself, not fully trusting anyone with full truths, had a pet rabbit named Floppy. Esgal, Legolas, Legolas. Thranduil's heart pounded in a rapid, frantic beat. His mind whirled, unable to truly comprehend what he had just realized. But he knew it was true. Esgal was Legolas, despite what the tree said. Esgal was Legolas. Legolas was Esgal. His son was here. Aye, Valor, he had been here the whole time. He was safe. Thranduil could not breathe. He could not breathe. He could not breathe? Thranduil opened and shut his mouth silently, a hacking cough escaping his lips. Agony ripped through his body, just as warm, sticky liquid sprayed from his mouth. Blood. The Elven King gave a gasping heave, horror washing away his joy and relief as another realization became painfully clear. His weakness, his sluggishness, the lingering ache in his limbs, these ailments were not from a drug. They were from poison. The men had poisoned him in case they failed, most likely planning to give him the antidote once they were out of Mirkwood. But the hunters had died, and Thranduil had been rescued, with poison running through his veins. Another bolt of pain tore through Thranduil's middle, and he curled up, coughing up more blood. He swayed, falling sideways, the collision with the ground more painful than it should have been. A hand touched his arm, and it was like fire licking his skin. He could see the young violet-eyed elf speaking to him, but he could not hear the words. His hearing had been overcome by a low roar, mixed with the pounding of his desperate heart. His vision darkened and blurred, his son's face fading rapidly from view. Panic overtook Thranduil then. No, he could not fall unconscious now. If he fell, he might not come back. He felt his lips moving, but no words passed them. His throat felt clogged and choked, air unable to reach his starving lungs. But he could not give in. He had to speak. He had to tell Esgal, Legolas, who he was. My son, my son, my son. The roaring was fading, and he could no longer hear the slowing beat of his heart. All that was left was the frantic, terrified cries of the shadowed trees in his mind. As more blood trickled slowly down his chin, Thranduil struggled mentally. He tried to reach out to the trees, to tell them so they could at least tell his son the truth. He could not do it. He failed. All hearing faded, all thoughts fled, all pain vanished, and the Elven King went limp. Legolas rose in terror as Thranduil slumped onto the ground, fading from consciousness. His front was speckled with crimson blood, and his features were pale and horrifyingly still. For a moment, it was not the golden-haired elf that laid in front of him, but a dead siren. The assassin jerked forward, searching for a pulse, and was relieved to find a fluttery beat. The Elven King's aura was also weak and faint, but it was still there. Thranduil was not dead. He was not dead. But Legolas now knew that the Elven King had been poisoned. The assassin struggled to think rationally. It was not Siren dying in front of him. The Elven King was still alive. But he could not think of what to do. Elvish spirit energy healing was useless against poisons that were not dark, like poison from a Morgul blade. Injuries that were physical or spiritual could be rapidly healed. The first happened through a transfer of energy that sped up the injured's healing process. The latter was a battle between light and dark, the healer using their energy to push back the darkness that was poisoning a person's mind, body, and soul. But elvish energy healing could not purge the body of poison. No amount of that type of healing would let the body recover from a deadly poison. It could reverse the physical damage done, but the poison in the body would remain. That was why antidotes to such things as spider's poison were needed by healers such as Lord Elrond. The only other thing that could reverse and expunge the poison was a specific wizard spell. Legolas was not absolutely sure how it worked, but knew that Istar magic could be worked in far different ways than Elvish. That left him with a choice, to go back to the men and try to find the antidote that they had been intending to give the Elven King. Elised had said that Saruman wanted Thranduil alive. Or try to find Radagast. Both meant leaving Thranduil, a very bad thing. But the assassin may not have a choice, because for once, there was nothing Legolas could do. He was helpless, and he hated it. Legolas trembled slightly as he looked at the Elven King, fear like a shadow in his mind. If he left, the Cinder could die before he came back. If he did not leave, someone he cared about would die in his arms again. The assassin was terrified, unable to decide, the burden that was crushing him more terrible than anything he had ever faced. He could not lose someone like this again, not ever again. He was running out of time. Valor curse it, but he could not. A presence entered his awareness, wonderful and relieving, and oh, thank Eru. Legolas screamed, all of his desperation in his voice. Radagast! The foliage to his left rustled, and the brown wizard raced onto the grounds where Dol Guldur once stood. He took in the scene at a glance, rushing forward and kneeling next to Thranduil. The hunters did this? The wizard asked rapidly, all goofiness gone in the wake of grim seriousness. Legolas nodded and opened his mouth to speak, only to be stunned by the small sob that escaped his lips. Radagast looked at him, compassion in his expression, but still mostly paying attention to the Elven King. "I can help him and purge the poison in his body, but I need you to go to the men and find the antidote, just in case Thranduil still needs it. Go, now," the wizard ordered. Legolas nodded and raced away, in the direction of the men. He stumbled a few times, tripping over a root before he kept going, fear lending speed to his tired feet. He felt something trickling down his cheek and touched it, shocked to find that they were wet. "He's going to be fine," the violet-eyed elf stubbornly told himself. "He's going to be all right." But what if he was not? What if Thranduil died? It would be Legolas's fault, not just because he had let the men take the Elven King, but because he had been unable to stay and help the Sindar. The fact that Thranduil was dying in Dol Guldur only made the young elf feel worse. He hated that place, hated it with a passion he had been unaware of until he had returned with the Elven King. Dol Guldur may have given him Siren and, through the man, his skills, but it had taken so much. It was where Siren had died, where Legolas had been forced to suppress his inner light and had accidentally sealed away his own memories. It was where he had lived in darkness and rage, a cold, simmering hatred in his heart that had gradually calmed over time. Legolas had been thinking about himself in Dol Guldur back then, before his escape, and seen how much he had changed. However, he had also seen how he had not changed at all. Just earlier that day, he had killed mercilessly and apathetically, in his most detached assassin mode. He had killed with a casualness that scared him, now that he thought about it. A casualness he had not truly used since leaving Dol Guldur. He had killed those men, and felt nothing while he was doing it. That was where his thoughts had been when the shadowed oak tree had spoken. It must have been reacting to his thoughts, for it was like a verbal answer to his greatest fear right then. Daelis, not Legolas. How true that statement was. Legolas had been an elfling, an innocent elfling with eyes that were not violet. The assassin could not remember what color his eyes had once been anymore, though he could recall Siren reminding him that violet was not his natural color. Elfling Legolas had had a family outside of Dol Guldur. Again, something that the assassin did not remember. The elfling had not been an assassin, had had an inner light, and was not a killer. Of those things, the violet-eyed elf was certain. Elfling Legolas had been everything the assassin was not, and until he retrieved his memories, he may never be that again. In fact, even then, he may still not be Legolas. Bitter tears ran down Legolas's face, but he forced himself to refocus on his task. He had to get the antidote, just in case Radagast failed. If the wizard could not purge the poison, and the assassin was not back, then the Elven King would die. Another failure to save made by Legolas, assassin and merciless killer. He would always be a weapon, and he could never be Elfling Legolas again. For the second time in less than a few hours, Thranduil woke to aching pain. A foul, metallic taste was in his mouth, and light pain seemed to be running through his veins rather than blood. The Elven King felt exhausted and ill, shivering for no apparent reason. But even so, he struggled to open his eyes and sit up, only able to whisper in a soft, hoarse voice, "Legolas." Someone shifted at his side, but he knew it was not his son. Panic was quick to come. He could not be gone. And the Elven King finally succeeded in seeing the world around him. Radagast was leaning over him, eyes bright with relief. "Elven King Thranduil." The cinder ignored him, sitting up despite the echoes of pain it caused, and brushing away the wizard's helpful hand. Blue eyes raked the area around them rapidly, fear and despair rising when the one the golden-haired elf sought was nowhere to be found. "Iãgaw," the Elven King said frantically. "Where is Legolas?" "Legolas," Radagast whispered. "Yes, Legolas. Esgal is Legolas. My son has been so close all of this time." Frustration mixed with the joy in the elf's voice. He gave a laugh, half happy, half self-hating. "He was right there, and I never put the pieces together. I did not recognize my own child, but that does not matter." Thranduil turned to look at him, a wide smile on his face. "Legolas is all right," he said giddily, face glowing. "He isn't in Minas Morgul like we feared. He's been free for all of these years, and—" The happy grin faded from Thranduil's face as he saw the wizard's expression. It was a mixture of grimness and guilt, not lightness or joy in his features. There was not any surprise or shock either. The truth came to the elf like a slap to the face. "You knew," Thranduil whispered, staring at the brown wizard with wide eyes. "You knew he was... you... Delorsian!" Mustering all of his lacking strength, Thranduil lunged for Radagast, punching him solidly in the face. The blow was enough to send the wizard staggering back, but he kept his footing. Before Thranduil could follow up on his initial attack, his energy left him and he fell. Radagast caught him, helping him remain seated, and a livid Thranduil could only glare at the Istar. "You Delorsian! 3 of my children are headed for Minas Morgul on a wild goose chase because of your silence," the enraged father snarled. "Why didn't you tell me?" Radagast looked right into the angry blue eyes of the cinder, expression grieved but calm. "I did not tell you because he is not your son, Thranduil." The Elven King's teeth bared, almost growling at the wizard. "Don't you dare lie to me. I know that he is. Don't you dare try to tell me otherwise." The Istar remained solemn in the face of the golden-haired elf's rage. "Let me clarify, Thranduil. Esgal may be your son in body, but he is not your son in mind. When I told you that I did not know where your son was, I spoke the truth. Prince Legolas Thranduilian remains lost. He is lost along with Legolas's memories. He does not know you, Thranduil." That made Thranduil pause. "Of course he does. We met." "You met less than 60 years ago, as an assassin and the Elven King. Esgal does not remember that you are his father. He does not know that he is a prince. He does not remember his family, his old life, or even who he is. Tell me, Thranduil." Radagast's saddened eyes looked right into the Elven King's. "How is he supposed to know who you are, if he does not even know who he is?" Thranduil's anger and joy were draining away, replaced by fear and uncertainty. "I can tell him. My children and I can—" "That may have worked if you had known Esgal shortly after he escaped Dol Guldur. But it has been 400 years since then, and nearly 500 years since he was first taken," Radagast explained, taking no joy in his words. "You just found out. All the coincidences about Esgal coming together. But before that, Esgal being your son was not even a possibility in your mind. And just like you, being the lost prince is not even a possibility in Esgal's mind." "Stop calling him Esgal," Thranduil hissed. "His name is Legolas." Radagast ignored him. His voice grew slightly louder, an emotion close to anger in his tone. "Even if you told Esgal that he was your son, even if you gave him all of the facts and showed proof of your words, he would not believe it. He is Legolas in body, but not in mind. Because he is without his memories. Because he has been without them for so long. Because he has known you as the Elven King and his siblings as friends, except one who apparently hates him, he will never believe he is the lost prince. He will think you are wrong. He will be plagued by doubt and guilt, and he will be deeply hurt. I speak of the hurting of his spirit, for I know that even if he does not believe he is the prince and thinks you made a mistake, he will try so hard to be your son, even though he thinks you made a mistake. Not only that, but others will think you are wrong as well, and they will not be kind about their disbelief. Men that Esgal led into Mirkwood kidnapped you, and when you return, suddenly it is apparent that Esgal is your son? The advisors will not believe it, and will do everything in their power to prove you wrong, because a strange, violet-eyed assassin cannot be the lost prince. They will contain him. They will try to control him. They will hurt him with word, and help strengthen the self-doubts. Because he cannot be the lost prince. He is an assassin. He is a wood elf as far as he is aware. He once told me that his mentor called him prince, but that it was a joke on the man's part. He believed it was a joke. He does not remember that he has silver blue eyes. He does not even remember his mother's appearance or death anymore. He can only remember a pet rabbit named Floppy. And Floppy could be a blasted common name for a pet. Radagast breathed in sharply, letting the air out in a slow gust before he spoke again. Because of his lost memories, his past, and the time that has passed, Legolas will never believe he is your son, no matter what evidence you show him. That is why I did not tell you who Esgal was. Because if you and others found out, I knew that you would either tell him or would treat him differently. And do you know who will be the most hurt and confused by your actions? Legolas. He may wish to know about his past, but he cannot find out like this, Radagast whispered. He is a young spirit, joyful, free, and so easily harmed. You yourself saw his reaction to Baroneth's actions and words in Rivendell 50 years ago. He may act confident and unaffected, and many times he truly feels this way, but he is vulnerable. While his memories remain lost, if you tell him this, or tell others, then he will be crushed, Thranduil, and I fear he may never recover. Sad eyes looked into stunned blue. Do you understand, Elven King? Thranduil opened and closed his mouth repeatedly, unable to speak for a moment. You do not want me to tell him, the Elven King eventually choked. Him or my children. For the sake of Legolas, yes, the wizard said gravely. Thranduil wanted to argue. He wanted to tell the wizard that he was wrong. But he knew Esgal, not nearly as well as he wanted to, but still knew him. Radagast's words rang true. The assassin would not believe that he was the lost prince. He would try to be a son, brother, and prince, but he would always think that the Elven King was wrong. A part of him would hope that Thranduil was right, but he would think deep inside himself that the Sindar was mistaken. Legolas would try as long as he could, would struggle as long as he could, but without his memories as proof, he would eventually fail and shatter, and no one would be able to pick up the pieces. The Elven King put his head in his hands, resisting the urge to sob. What do I do? He whispered. I cannot ignore this. I do not expect you to, Radagast murmured. Just be patient. There is still hope. Legolas's memories still exist inside him, and perhaps proper prompting will help to release a few of them. But you must be careful, Thranduil. The mind is a powerful and complex thing. It can be easily broken, and not so easily mended. Amnesia is volatile and dangerous, the mind left in a fragile state because of it. You may try to help, but do not rush into things. I know, the Elven King whispered heavily. A new fear struck him, and he looked up at the wizard. Fail, Baroneth, and Megalag are headed to Minas Morgul for no reason. The wizard grimaced. I am afraid that their fates are out of our hands now. Unless you wish to send out another child to try to retrieve them, I am afraid we must let them continue their journey. Aye, Valor, Thranduil groaned. This is all such a... You're awake, a familiar, joyful voice called. Thranduil froze as Esgal Legolas ran up to him, relief evident on his face and his violet eyes glowing. I'm so glad you are all right, the assassin exclaimed, far from the normal, soft-spoken elf he mostly saw, and so close to the happy elfling he once knew, that Thranduil felt his heart twinge. I see Radagast was able to heal you. Mostly, the wizard said, to cover up for Thranduil's struggling silence. Do you have the antidote? It would be best to make sure. Legolas, it was Legolas, held up a vial filled with a light blue liquid. Here it is. Thranduil noticed that his violet eyes never left him, as if the assassin was afraid to look away. His heart clenched once more. Had him almost dying scared the young elf so greatly? Hands shaking, the Elven King took the vial from his son and downed it, trying to sort out his thoughts. He wanted so badly to take Legolas into his arms and hug him, never letting go and keeping him safe forevermore, but he knew that he could not. He was beginning to understand that not only doubt would hurt the young elf if he knew the truth. Others would overprotect and contain him if they found out who he was. Legolas needed to be free. He could not be kept in the palace and locked away, cut off from the world. Thranduil could not tell him. He could not contain him. His son needed to be happy and free. Unable to stop himself any longer, the Elven King grabbed the assassin in a hug, the violet-eyed elf startled by the action but not resisting. Thranduil silently laid his head on top of his youngest son's, carefully avoiding the braid spikes, simply sitting and holding him. My lord? Legolas's voice was soft and concerned, but the way he addressed Thranduil was like a spear through the cinder's heart. My lord Thranduil? Why are you crying? Oh, he was crying. Thranduil breathed in a shuddering breath, pulling away from his son and forcing a smile onto his face. I'm just happy you are all right, he said shakily. I was worried when you were gone. Legolas looked confused by his words, but his eyes softened and he gave one of the timid, small smiles the Elven King had grown used to. Yes, I am here now. Radagast said nothing, and did not interrupt the heartwarming yet one-sided reunion between father and son. Thranduil simply sat there and held Legolas as long as he could, the assassin not breaking contact, most likely thinking that the Elven King's odd behavior was because of after-effects of the poison. But the Elven King did not care. His son was here. He was all right. He was safe. And even though he could not tell Legolas or his other children the truth, or risk hurting his youngest, for now it would have to be enough. That did not mean that he was going to sit idly by, however. He knew that Legolas said his memories were caught behind his mental shield. He knew that he was most likely setting himself up for pain and heartache, but he did not care. Thranduil would be careful, he would be patient, he would not give up because he was going to fight, blast it. No matter how long it took and how many times he failed, the Elven King was going to try to help his son get his memories back. The 2 elves and 1 wizard continued their trek back towards the palace not long after that. Legolas was confused by the Elven King's almost hysterical reaction to him, but was glad that he had been able to provide some comfort to his parental figure? Mentor? Friend? He was not quite sure what Thranduil was to him. Either way, he had felt giddily happy when he saw that the golden-haired elf was awake, and felt no qualms about being hugged by the Cinder. Although he did not know why the Elven King would want to hug a killer. But now they were headed back, and Thranduil was striding through the woods with a determined, grim air. Legolas did not know what had gained the Cinder's stubborn attention, but knew that once the Elven King set his mind to something, he would not stop until he succeeded. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of new presences, and he called out to the others, "Aglar is coming." The Crown Prince dropped from the treetops, followed quickly by 5 warriors. "Are you all right, Adar?" Aglar asked urgently, walking forward and scanning his father for injuries. "I'm fine now," Thranduil said, though his voice was strained. "Esgal killed the men and rescued me." He did not mention the side trip to Dol Guldur, or being poisoned. Perhaps he did not want his son to worry, but Legolas knew that things eventually tended to come out into the open without people's permission. The silver-haired prince smiled, relief evident, but there was worry in his eyes. The Elven King noticed as easily as the assassin. "What has happened?" Thranduil asked. Aglar grimaced, expression dark. "The men killed 6 warriors when they kidnapped you. Helid, Uil, Arasun, Istel, Nathor, and Gelinas." Thranduil's eyes closed, and Legolas stiffened in shock, guilt flaring up once more. Helid was dead. Helid, who he had just spoken to yesterday, distracting him while he helped Fael, Megalag, and Baroneth escape. "Aye, valor," the Cinder whispered, placing a hand over his eyes. "I knew that it was likely, but I prayed that it was not so." He shook his head, teeth clenching, before he reined in his grief. "That is not all that has happened. Tell me, what else has occurred?" The Crown Prince hesitated, looking torn. "I think I should wait to tell you until we reach the palace," he said. Thranduil gave him a stern look. "I disagree. What has happened?" Aglar swallowed, eyes bright with grief and fear, and Legolas felt his own nerves rising in response. "Esgal left hours ago to come for you, and we left soon after," he said at last. "However, it took a while for us to get here, because we had to make a detour." His voice grew steadily quieter, but the elves around him could still easily hear. The violet-eyed elf's eyes flickered over the 5 warriors with the Crown Prince. All of them looked shaken, scared, and lost, as if their world was crashing down. "I had 2 more warriors with me, but they had to return to the palace," Aglar continued softly. "With the elves of Lothlorien." Thranduil blinked. "What? Some of the elves have come to Mirkwood?" "Not some, Adar," Aglar whispered, and his voice trembled. "All of them. Lothlorien has been destroyed."